All right. Thanks everybody for joining today. We're moving through a couple different sections of the class today as we kind of check off a few of the boxes that we want to send you off with before the course ends. But the first thing that we are starting with today is identifying your own opportunities for deeper member engagement. Last week, you heard from Zetland and Black Ballad about how they've built these really deep relationships with their members and then been able to leverage that for other opportunities for editorial impact, new revenue streams, and really exceptional member growth. And so I'm going to really briefly, before we move into breakouts, talk a little bit about how you can identify your own sort of opportunity for that level of deep member engagement. At MPP, we call them memberful routines. Memberful routines are the workflows that connect your audience members to the journalism and the journalists that are producing it on a regular basis. Many of us at this point are very familiar with the term engaged journalism, when your journalism is responsive to community needs and it's created with community participation. But it's only when that practice of engaged journalism becomes sort of routine within your newsroom and happens on a consistent basis that can really affect the way that audience members interact with your organization. And so I'll walk through today a pretty simple process for beginning to identify those opportunities for developing memberful routines among your team. Okay. First off, why do you want to have memberful routines? Probably sounds like a lot of work to make it routine to work with your audience members day in and day out. But there are a couple ways that they really can strengthen your newsroom. The first is that they engage your audience members more deeply, which makes them more likely to convert to members when you make that ask to them. The second is that they provide really consistent informal feedback to your newsroom. You heard from Bola last week about all the little bits and pieces of things that Black Ballad is getting on a regular basis from their members as a result of their onboarding survey, as a result of the Slack community that they have developed, and so how that sort of informs the team's work day in and day out. And another is they deepen the relationship you have with your members, which makes them stickier. It makes them less likely to churn. It makes them more likely to help you recruit other members. And really, at its core, these memberful routines are a loyalty and retention strategy. And then making this routine is what allows you to maintain this work during unexpected events like a pandemic, like an election, other major news moments. We all know how those news bumps can really derail the kinds of things that you are trying to put in place in your newsroom unless you have developed an internal routine, unless you sort of developed a workflow around that. And the success and the impact that you heard last week from Zetland and Black Ballad, they were able to achieve that impact because they had invested heavily in memberful routines before they made the asks. In Zetland's case, before they asked members to help them recruit more members. In Black Ballad's case, before they started sending out these 100 question surveys to sort of design their editorial campaigns. They had success there because they invested in this work before that. So making those participation opportunities routine in your newsroom really come down to some pretty easy to understand basic steps. The first is finding the intersection point between your audience member motivations to participate in your work and what your newsroom needs from audience members in order to expand the scope and impact of your work. If the thing that you're asking your audience members to do doesn't solve a need for your newsroom, it's going to be really hard to build time into your calendar to support that. It's going to be really hard to get your team on board, and it's eventually going to peter out because it's not actually doing something to help your team. So it's really important that the opportunities of participation that you offer do actually contribute to an organizational goal that your organization has. The second is identifying really clearly the stage in the reporting process that that's going to happen. Is that happening in the planning stage, the research and reporting stage, the editing stage, fact checking, or sort of the post-publication distribution stage? And one of the reasons we encourage people to think and identify really clearly that stage in the process is because if all of the participation opportunities you're offering are happening post-publication at that distribution stage, you're not really giving audience members the opportunity to meaningfully affect your work. You're only engaging them at the point where the work is done, it's been edited, it's published, it's out there in the world. And so all you're asking them to do is basically be a distribution strategy for you. So it's important to think about ways that you can involve audience members at some of those earlier stages as well. So it's truly an engaged journalism effort. And last is pretty obvious, you're going to choose a couple of channels to distribute that participation opportunity. You're going to want to choose channels where you already meet your audience members on a regular basis. You already have a sort of loyal community For most people, that's going to be their newsletter, but maybe you've got a really engaged Facebook group. Maybe you have very regular events that get really great attendance. Wherever you're sort of reaching audience members directly is a really good place to get this ask out in the world. And the question we always get when we talk about this is why do audience members participate? How do we find out what motivates our audience members to engage in our work? And the 6 motivations that you see on the screen are not necessarily going to cover all of the motivations that we see out there in the world. But these are the 6 that Membership Puzzle Project heard most often when we worked with newsrooms to help identify those participation opportunities. So many people participate because they want to learn something new. They have curiosity about a topic. City Bureau's Documenters program is a great example of that. They learn how to follow public meetings and how to report on that work and contribute to the journalistic process that way. Maybe they want to contribute their expertise, show a superpower. So when newsrooms ask people, do any of you have experience with X? Can you share this? Can you help our reporters report out this topic? That is when you're asking people to show their superpower and sort of get involved with an area of expertise that they have. Another is I want to have a say and be heard. They want their voice to be heard. Black Ballad's Black Motherhood Project that you heard about last week is a great example of an organization that harnessed their members' desire to have their voice heard in really meaningful ways. A thing we talk about a lot is transparency. So a lot of people engage because they want to know how things happen behind the scenes. So organizations that are pursuing cooperative models very often have an annual general meeting in which they really dig into the books. They share their budget, they share their spending, they share how they're making decisions. People who attend those meetings are joining because they are motivated by that transparency. Passion, I want to show some love because your work matters. Zetland is a fantastic example of an organization that figured out how to successfully harness their community members, their audience members' passion for their work. And last is, I want to be part of something bigger than myself. People are motivated by a sense of community and will do a lot to sort of cultivate that sense of community and feel that in their interactions with your organizations. And so these are the 6 motivations we hear most often. And then when you look at what newsrooms needs are, and you're trying to find that intersection point, the 4 that we heard most often are the need to create high quality work, the need to find audiences who will benefit from that work, identify additional ideas that might be relevant to your mission, and of course, to be sustainable financially. And so we encourage newsrooms to sort of take a look at those needs that they might have, and then think about what motivations that their audience members might share and how they can find that intersection point between them. And a great example of that comes from Radio Ambulante, which is a Spanish language narrative storytelling podcast that's published on NPR. We studied Radio Ambulante for the membership guide, and here we'll sort of break down their listening clubs, which is their greatest sort of memberful routine that they offer their audience members. So the listener motivation for Radio Ambulante's listening clubs was that they heard again and again from their loyal listeners that they really wanted a place where they could go to talk about Radio Ambulante with other listeners of Radio Ambulante. The sort of nature of narrative storytelling podcasts, but especially Radio Ambulante's, is they're deeply personal and they evoke a lot of sort of feelings and emotions among the people that are listening. And so people would come off of listening to a podcast episode and just like feel this really strong need to talk about it and talk about how they related to it. And Radio Ambulante was a relatively small team, 20 people spread across the US and Latin America, and they could not meet that need on their own in order to sort of help people feel like they had a place to talk about that. So their need was to figure out a way to scale the community building that came out of those conversations after the podcast episodes. And so they decided to launch what they called listening clubs. And this was going to be events that could happen anywhere in the world. That they had Radio Ambulante staff or Radio Ambulante listeners, so people could get together in person, listen to the podcast when it was released, and then have a conversation in person about the podcast. Of course, the reporting process stage of that, as we talked about before, is distribution. And the way that they first tested this out and then turned it into routine is they first had their staff members host 20 listening clubs in cities around the world where they were already living. And they sort of used those staff listening club sessions to workshop things like how do we keep people engaged and how much time do we need to set aside for this event? How big of a venue do we probably need? And then they use those sort of test listening clubs to then write a guidebook to how to host your own listening club. And they opened this up to the entire Radio Ambulante listening base. And people just go onto their website and they register their interest in hosting a listening club, it goes on a map. And then if somebody wants to attend the listening club, they can go to that map on the Radio Ambulante site and find the nearest listening club to them. When the pandemic started, all of these listening clubs sort of moved online to Google Meet and Zoom and things like that. And now people are attending listening clubs in cities that they don't live in, and they're sort of building this even more global network of Radio Ambulante listeners. So we share this example because it sort of really draws very clearly that intersection point between the organization's needs and the audience members' motivation to participate, to feel that sense of community. And you sort of see how they went from trying it out once to see how it worked, to how they have made it routine within the newsroom and sort of happens in the background now without much effort on their part. And the last sort of element of this sort of identifying participation opportunities is making sure you're offering appropriate opportunities to participate. So you can't just right off the bat ask people to complete a 100-question survey like Black Ballad did, or to go and become an ambassador for your organization if you haven't built a relationship up with them already. And so at MPP, we have looked outside of news to figure out what is the right way to build a sort of participation ladder. How do you get people started on that participation opportunity? And so the example you see here on the screen comes from the citizen science movement. And you see that level 1 is sort of something that anybody can do. They call it citizens as sensors. So this is maybe teaching somebody how to go out and like take a water level reading if you're tracking sea level rise. Anybody can do that after like reading a basic instruction worksheet or having a phone call with the scientist who's running this project. The second level there is citizens as basic interpreters. So these citizens might now learn how to talk about the science project that they're working on, learn how to talk in sort of layman's terms about some of the scientific research that you're doing. That's a little bit more involved than that level 1, but it's still not a huge ask in terms of expertise or time that somebody has to invest. That third level, participatory science, is when they begin to participate in the data collection, the problem definition. That requires probably a certain level of scientific knowledge, and it definitely requires more time than the 2 levels below it. And of course, at the 4th level, that sort of extreme level of participation is when you're really getting deep into the research work. And that is something that probably only a handful of people will participate in because it's a multi-hour ask. It requires a certain level of knowledge, et cetera. And so this is really applicable to news organizations because you have different levels of needs from your audience members. So if we were applying this, for example, to Black Ballad and their sort of Black motherhood survey last week, that level 1 might be just the onboarding survey that Bola spoke about that takes about 5 minutes to answer. It's 14 questions. It doesn't really take much for somebody to have to answer that onboarding survey. But once they do the onboarding survey, then they might join the Slack group. And the Slack group is something that's still not a huge level of involvement for themselves, but it is a little bit more time. It does require a little bit more effort on their part to engage. And they also probably need to feel a little bit more comfortable with you before they start engaging in the Slack group really meaningfully. So that's that sort of level 2. And the level 3 is that 100-question survey that Bola spoke about. That takes 30, 40 minutes to answer potentially. And Black Ballad in this case was asking them some fairly sensitive questions about this work. And so you can see there sort of how they have a level 1 option, a level 2 option, and a level 3 option. And we bring this up because a lot of newsrooms go straight from, oh, we want to invite audience members to participate, and the opportunity to participate they offer is like a really intensive 3-hour participation opportunity that you're asking them to do. And then you don't get the response rate that you hope to. And so you can sort of take this participation ladder approach to your memberful routines. You can begin to sort of break it down into bite-sized pieces and get more people on that participation journey with your newsroom. Now that we are through that, I wanted to briefly introduce our panelists today. We've got a great chat for the next 30, 35 minutes or so with leaders from 3 organizations that are working with newsrooms that have mature membership programs. So you have Lance Noble, who's the co-founder and CEO of Cityside. We have Maria Ramirez, who's the director of strategy for El Diario. And we have Graham Watson-Ringo, who's the senior director of membership strategy for News Revenue Hub. I've got their Twitter handles on this slide, and you'll get these slides after the fact, so you can follow them on Twitter if you want to keep the conversation going. But I think now we'll just invite Lance, Maria, and Graham to join us. Thanks, everybody. I think first I'd love to hear from each of you, and people should start dropping questions in the chat. I'll get started with 1 or 2 questions, but we'll really let you guide this discussion with Lance, Maria, and Graham. But to kick us off, I'd love to hear from each of you. Sort of what do you see as, tell us a little bit about your membership program, the size, when you launched membership, and then would love to hear what was the biggest challenge you had in, say, the first year of your membership program. And if Graham, you want to sort of offer what you see across the News Revenue Hub partners, that would be great. Lance is first on my screen. If you wanted to start first, Lance.
Sure, I'm happy to. Happy to take part in this. I actually have two stories to tell, and Ariel, you can guide me as to which is the more relevant. So, Berkeley side, which was founded 12 years ago, has had a membership program for over 10 years now. So, it's certainly mature. We have about 4,200 members on Berkeley side. It grew very, very strongly last year, March, April, May, early days of the pandemic. We worked really hard. Obviously, we were very intent on raising money from members, and we pushed it hard, and made it clear the news we were providing, the information we were providing was absolutely critical, and the community really responded, and we saw a huge spike in membership during those months, and it's largely been sustained. We launched Oaklanside last June in the middle of the pandemic, which obviously had its own issues, launching when the newsroom was completely virtual, when most of the people working on Oaklanside had never been in a room together. But we set a very ambitious goal. We thought membership was very important to Oaklanside. We set the ambitious goal of, by the end of 2020, getting to 1,000 members. We actually reached that in September. By the end of the year, we were at 1,500. We're now nearly at 2,100 members with Oaklanside. What's the biggest challenge? It's keeping up the momentum. We've actually found over the mature years with Berkeley side, members really appreciate it. There's a lot of love for what we do in the community, and that's reflected in the membership. But internally, kind of keeping up the momentum, keeping up the communication, being transparent and really connecting in a sort of honest and human way with our readers, with our members. That's something we have to continually remind ourselves of. Oaklanside, with the kind of new freshness, to be honest, my jaw is still on the floor at how quickly we've been able to get members there. And internally, we think we haven't even really tried very hard yet. It's just they've really flowed in. So that's my summary of things.
Great. Thanks, Lance. Maria, you want to go next?
Yeah, well, I'm very happy to be here. And a word about El Diario. El Diario is a general news outlet in Spain, a bit more focused on politics perhaps, but just in general news. It was born 9 years ago, and is founded half of our resources come from members, and the other half from advertising. So we have this mixed model, and it has always been profitable. So that's quite good news. And well, we have also like an amazing, and we were even feeling bad about it because it was clearly an amazing year for membership, and it was not just for us. It was also for all the newspapers who started actually subscription models in Spain. Spain has been kind of slow in embracing membership or subscription models, but finally it's really happening. So El País is the largest newspaper in Spain, and they launched a subscription model in the middle of the pandemic, and actually they are now the first, we're the second, so we're doing okay. And in terms of the challenge, I wasn't there the first year, so I can't tell, but I guess like the obsession for everyone always has been growth. Because at the beginning, this project was founded by journalists who were already very popular in Spain. So they naturally attracted, like in the first few months, many members. But of course, the challenge is to keep growing. And we had sort of reached a plateau just before the pandemic, and we were kind of trying to figure out how to just grow. And then the pandemic hit and everything happened sort of more easily. Also because we ask directly our members for help. At the beginning, we really thought that we were in big trouble. Actually, we weren't, apparently, but we thought we were in big trouble because advertising campaigns suddenly were canceling really quickly. So we launched kind of a really powerful message asking for help, and it was really overwhelming. But now that the pandemic is sort of stabilized, we were again thinking about this, about how to keep the new members and how to grow. So what we did in the last few months was a project that we had just before the pandemic to grow, and it was to transform our model a bit. We are a membership kind of news outlet in the sense that we're open, that you can, our philosophy is that you can always read the articles, even if you can pay. But before we were like The Guardian or NPR, so completely open. Anyone could read without even finding much friction. And the difference is that now there is friction. So when you reach a 10 article limit, you could get a message saying, please become a member, and like explaining what options do you have. And you would always have an option to become a member paying €0, so $0, €0. So it's a way to, okay, if you can pay, it's okay. You can even lie to us. You can say that you can pay, but you are really super rich and you can really pay. But it's okay if you decide to say that you can pay. We are okay with that too, and we get the email of this person at least. So that was a way also to just keep growing, because we have these two ways of growing. One is obviously journalism, and especially in times of crisis, elections, and the other is other ways to just push people. So in the other ways to push people, this is working. We know that without the other, it's impossible, but this kind of trick to push a bit more, it's working for us at least.
Yeah. And I thought when you made that announcement at the beginning of the pandemic, Maria, about raising the prices and that sort of opportunity people could pay for zero, I thought that the message that your editor-in-chief sent was really powerful and it was very transparent. You talked about, I think you maybe, did you cut salaries for top leadership? And so El Diario sort of laid out all of the financial implications of the pandemic for them in this link that I dropped in the chat. And that's where they told people about the price increase and asked people to, let them know if they couldn't handle the price increase. So sort of extreme transparency in that moment. And I think Google Translate will probably do a pretty decent job of translating that piece if you want to read it yourself. That's how I know what's in it. Graham, would love to hear from you sort of what you see across the News Revenue Hub clients, maybe also at the Rivard report. Sort of what's the biggest challenge year one? What have you seen these organizations sort of doing with membership through the pandemic and as we sort of begin to emerge from it?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, throughout my career, I've seen all sorts of different ways to try and make money. Most of my career spent in mainstream media, super large mainstream media. And so I've seen everything from, free access to hard paywalls, to subscriptions, to dynamic paywalls. And then I went over to Rivard Report / San Antonio Report from a dynamic paywall and a paper that was a traditional newspaper that had a free site and a pay site. So that is just a whole level of complexity that really is a tough sell with your readership, because you do have some mixed branding issues there. But going over to the San Antonio Report, I think, by the time I got there, they were about 2 years into being a nonprofit and really trying to grapple with the membership program and how they were going to make that successful, and small business team, really dedicated staff there, and really just started understanding what it meant to have a membership program, understanding the capacity of the staff, and understanding what we could and couldn't do, what we could and couldn't ask of a San Antonio community that was fairly engaged with television, not really engaged with the print products across the board, whether it was the newspaper or the San Antonio Report. And so really trying to find ways to keep us afloat with foundation money, with grants, and then really dig our heels into small dollar donations. And that's really where San Antonio made its hay. It's definitely those smaller dollar, those $1,000 and under dollar donations, and really pushing for that angle, as opposed to trying to find these big money and just hope for the best. I think we all realize that the whims of rich people are kind of dangerous, and so they may want to fund you today and then find some other cause later down the road. And so really and it was quite astounding to me, as somebody who'd come from mainstream media, to see people. I think I was at an event that we did one day, and a woman walked up and handed me a $20 bill to support us. And I was like, I don't know what to do with this. But it was so astounding to me that people would just open their wallets and give you money because they supported what you did. And all the content in San Antonio is free. And so it was kind of the journalism you wanted to do when you graduated college, right? And then you have a big shock that that's not the journalism you're going to do. You're going to do stuff that really satisfies advertisers, that gets clicks, things like that. And so going to a nonprofit model and really understanding what a membership program meant to a nonprofit model, and that people buy in because you're just doing really good work that's meaningful to your community, was just so eye-opening to me, and I fell in love with it. And that's why I went over to the News Revenue Hub, so I could share the joy with other people and other organizations. And News Revenue Hub is all about creating sustainable models for all of the clients, and they're not all nonprofit. Some of them are for-profit, some of them are split models. But it's really great to kind of understand the different challenges that all those folks have. And but the one thing we say across the board is, if you're not putting out a good product, then nobody's going to pay for your journalism. I mean, that's the underlying thing there. And then it's campaigning. I'm constantly telling our people it's really the Gordon Gekko, if you're old like me, the Wall Street model of like always be campaigning. And you're not going to get money if you don't ask for it. And it makes a lot of people sometimes uncomfortable. It makes it, I don't know, should I be always asking people for money? Yes, you should always be asking people for money, and you can do it, very tactful ways. You're not always asking the same people for money. There's a lot of ways to diversify your approach, but I think that's one of the hardest transitions for a lot of our organizations, is getting into that mode, as Lance was talking, of constantly investing in your membership, constantly campaigning, constantly thinking of new ways to get asks in front of people, or to build your newsletter list, to work your way, your clients and your audience down the funnel, and really invest in that. It's hard work. It's really hard. We get some orgs who are just starting up, and they're like, why isn't my list doubled? Well, it's really hard to double your list. Like, you really have to invest in the time and effort. And in some cases, it's harder than like a traditional media outlet, but it's way more rewarding. Because people are giving you money because they just believe in your mission and they believe in what you're doing. And so that's one of the things that I've really loved about the membership model, and one of the things that we've really been pushing for a lot of our clients is, like, you have to continue to ask, just keep asking, but and then just providing the right strategies to do it where you don't feel like shady at the end of the day about it as well.
That's a great point, to sort of always be campaigning. And Lance and Maria, I'm curious from you, both of you were early adopters of membership. And so you were probably the first membership-based news organization that your readers had ever encountered. So first off, like, how did you think about explaining that to people? And then how often do you ask people? I would love to hear the answers to both of those questions. I think that's something a lot of people in the group, when we had our marketing session, was like, how often is too often? And our answer was sort of like, if you don't feel uncomfortable, you're probably not asking enough yet. But curious what that looks like for you in terms of number of appeals and how you explained it to people in the beginning.
Well, I guess, as Graham was saying, it's not that you're asking the same people all the time. You're asking maybe every day to someone, but not the same people. So we have members and former members and registered people in different buckets. So for instance, we realized that former members, if you just leave them alone for a while, it's a place that you can go again and just try to bring them back. So from time to time, when there is special news coverage or there is an excuse, we just tap into that. And we sort of keep our editor-in-chief for the big moments. So we use him. He's very persuasive and has like a very strong brand. So we keep him from the really big moments. So in that way, I've asked in that dilemma, in our case, is dilemma of how to use our editor-in-chief. So we don't use him a lot and all the time, just to avoid that burnout. But the other messages, we send messages every day to different people, but every day. Definitely through the website and definitely through emails, definitely inviting them to events. And then there is always a line in every newsletter. There is always a line if you are not a member to become a member. So you can be more pushy or less pushy, but every day we send emails to people and other messages asking for money in different ways. And they don't complain. So, I mean, sometimes, yeah, you get people to drop out of a mailing list, but it's not something that's really big. Just people, it's more frequent that people may not open the emails, but they usually are not that bothered if you do it carefully. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Just ask.
Yeah, I think that's unquestionably true. I mean, we have calls to action on our websites and our email, in our email newsletters all the time. In terms of concerted effort on membership, we do kind of go in waves. We have a spring campaign, we have an end of year campaign, and then every month we have what the hub calls timely topicals. We find something each month that is using the events of the day or maybe something we've done on our sites and use that as the hook to reach out to people. And those are sometimes very, very effective, particularly if there's been a very dramatic news event, if we've done some particularly great journalism, reminding people right then and there how much they rely on us, how much they value our reporting. That's a very good moment to capture particularly new members. What Graham said about you have to ask and ask and ask again, unquestionably true. And what I often say to people is think about your own behavior when you get an email asking you to subscribe to something or to become a member. It may be something that you're really enthusiastic about, but I know at least for me, I get something and I say, oh yes, this is really good. I should do this. And then I move on. And then I get a second one. I said, yeah, I really meant to do this. And maybe it's the third or fourth time that somebody emails me about something. I say, I've been thinking I should do this for weeks. This time I'm going to click. I'm going to, pull out my credit card or whatever. So it takes that repeated asking to get the result. And, on something that Graham said, we find, and I suspect almost everyone has this experience, our existing members are the most generous people. New members, fantastic. We want to continue building that. But for instance, last March, April, May, when we were very, very aggressive about our advertising has collapsed. We need your support. It was the existing members who really stepped up and gave more and gave incredibly generously. And so, I think you have to get over feelings. I don't really think I could ask, send another email or ask people again. If people don't want to read it or don't want to open it, they won't. But, people, if they value what you do, they'll understand, you need their support, and I think they'll respond positively to it.
I'm curious also, as you talk about these campaigns and the work that goes into that, who in each of your newsroom works on membership? This is a question, another question we get at MPP a lot is like, what are the staffing configurations to support it? So curious how you handle it each in your newsrooms, Maria and Lance, and then maybe Graham, what are some of those common job descriptions or configurations that you see sort of touching membership, and likely they're also getting support from the hub as well. I just want to start with you, Lance, since you're on the screen.
Sure. And I suspect we have a much smaller staff than El Diario. So the membership campaign, when we started 10 years ago and we didn't know what we were doing, my co-founder, Tracy Taylor, I think did much of the work. I did quite a bit of the work. We continue to be, I think, the key people involved in that. On Oakland side, Tasneem Raja, who's the editor-in-chief there, she is typically coordinating things. We do, and we have for the last, 4 or 5 years, worked with the News Revenue Hub. And that really has been, I'll give it, a great plug for the News Revenue Hub. It really has extended our capabilities. I mean, we write most of the newsletters or the appeals that go out for membership. We're very attentive to the wording, but that constant nudging from the hub and templates, or this is a great time to do it, or here's a suggestion, that really, it's almost as if we had another 2 or 3 members of our staff who are thinking about us, except they're experts on membership and they're working externally. So that for us has worked very, very well.
So it's sort of distributed across a couple members of the team and supported by the hub.
Yeah.
Great. What about you, Maria at El Diario? Who's touching membership?
Like almost everybody actually. So like embedded in the newsroom and in the core of what we do. There's a specific team. So there's a director for membership, and she has a team of 4 people working full-time on members. One of those is focused on events, and that could be a bit beyond members. But then there are other people involved somehow. So it's quite, when we were in our newsroom, it was quite central to the newsroom. So it was not like another floor or another place. It was really in the center of the newsroom. So some of the editors would suggest also ideas to get more members, or so there was like really many people involved. And of course, the editor-in-chief and the CEO, a lot of work of what they do is around members. So I think that's, even if you don't have many resources to have many people devoted, the fact that it's so there is clearly a communication and everyone has like membership and members in mind, it's quite useful.
Anything to add to that, Graham, and sort of configurations for supporting membership in newsrooms?
No, I mean, I think, in San Antonio, they started with 2 people really doing it, and then they realized that they needed more capacity. So hired a membership coordinator, hired an events coordinator, and then those folks help, all in the membership side. But then they also involve the newsroom. I think, and that's one thing that we stress at the hub is that none of this can be done in a vacuum. That, I think everybody needs to be on the same page. I think the days of there being that wall between business and editorial are over. I think you need everybody, especially when you're a small shop, you need everybody on the same page, knowing why you're doing what you're doing. And then, as Lance was saying, writing those topicals that have to do with, sometimes you're asking a reporter to do it. Sometimes you're asking an editor to do it, to get those voices out, out of the newsroom. It's funny, some of the events that we do in San Antonio, people would be like, where's such and such reporter? Because they became like these like rock stars and they wanted to meet them and they wanted to talk with them. And you know, I think that is, it's useful to use your editorial staff to help you in that membership front, because they are the faces, they are the ones that people are coming back for. And so putting them out at front and getting them to understand why it's important that they be in the front is very crucial to any membership work.
Great, thanks. And since a lot of the newsrooms in this group are clearly either launching their onboarding campaigns or making changes to their onboarding campaigns based on who went to which breakouts, I'd be curious, you know, Lance, Maria, do you have an onboarding series for new members? How many emails are in that onboarding series and who writes those emails? And then Graham, what are your sort of recommendations at the hub for your clients as far as onboarding series go? You can work backwards again if you want to start, Graham.
Oh, I get to start. Okay, I'll start. So part of our onboarding is creating a welcome and a renewal series. So welcome series, you know, if somebody signs up for your newsletter, and we are always pushing people to the newsletter because it's proven that you get people on your newsletter, you're much more likely to have those people ultimately give you money and donate to your cause. You know, the people who sign up for the newsletter get a welcome series, and that can range anywhere from, you know, 3 emails to 5 emails. That's really dependent on the organization. You know, we kind of talk them through it of what we think would be best for their readership. But it is a series of multiple emails, and then you use those emails to explain who you are, what your mission is, who works for you, give it voice, allow people to peek behind the curtain. And then after a year, they get a renewal email, you know, if they're giving money, you know, we work on those things. So a year after they give money, then there's a renewal like, hey, you really supported us, you know, a year ago. And that has been huge for the COVID, because almost every group got a COVID bump. So we've been constantly pushing, like, it's been a year, you need to go back to these people because they probably only did a one-time gift. So you want to tell them and reiterate how important their money was, how important their gift was, what it did for your newsroom. Be as transparent as possible. I think right now transparency is key. I think trust in news is key. And so using your appeals to be as transparent as possible has been very successful for a lot of organizations, especially a lot of organizations that did struggle last year during COVID and continue to struggle. So, you know, we do set up, we 100% recommend that you have some sort of welcome series. I mean, we have one org that does like 14 emails, which we need to have some talks about. But I think, you know, it really just depends on you know, the org, but 100%, you're always making sure that you're keeping the pipeline going.
You know, in the chat, I see both Ariel and you have commented that a welcome series for new newsletter subscribers and a welcome series for new members. Our newsletter subscriber series definitely builds to, you know, telling them about membership and how important that is, and making that ask, and it's pretty successful. One other thing we do that I think is very easy, and I think not that many people do it, is once people click and become a member, you know, and they kind of complete that transaction, the thank you page they're taken to also has calls to action. You know, it kind of tells them about the things that they can do as a member. You know, they can join our private Facebook group. They can, you know, ask us to send them something. You know, it kind of encourages that further action. And I think that's a really easy thing to do that I often see. It's just like a thank you for becoming a member, and that's it. You know, I think if you kind of keep people going, that's good. It also has another thing. It in terms of your analytics, in terms of understanding what's happened, it kind of completes the loop. I mean, because we use the News Revenue Hub, the transaction is happening on the fundjournalism.org server. And so by taking them back to our thank you page, we actually can see in the analytics the full journey of they went to fund journalism and, oh, we got a result by coming back. And so you can track that whole, you know, with Google Analytics or any other tool you use, you can track the whole journey by doing that.
That's a great point about that membership thank you page, Lance. If we could get a screenshot, maybe you could email it to me that I could share with the group afterwards. I think people would love to see that. What about you, Maria? Or what about El Diario?
Well, yeah, we keep it quite simple. The onboarding process usually is just a couple of emails. One of those is definitely pushing for newsletter subscriptions when you become a member. And it varies. So now, for instance, we launched recently a daily newsletter written by a reporter with his name and quite personal. So we're pushing that a lot because we are seeing that helps really just for people to be more engaged with El Diario. In other times, we have to just send emails regarding our portfolio of titles of newsletter. So we kind of just try to see how it works. And what we usually do is try to also link messages to actions. For instance, now we're doing a lot of polls because it's election time in Madrid. We have these regional big elections coming. So there are debates and other issues that invite to political polls, who won the debate and all this stuff. So when someone answers to the poll, after answering, instead of just thank you for answering, there is a call for them to join our Telegram group. Telegram is like WhatsApp, so you can send messages like digest. That's what we do several times a day. We send a digest of our content, and it's quite popular, this Telegram. But so when we see that someone has taken an action as doing a poll, it's like, okay, that's a signal that these people is a bit more engaged maybe, and when I receive more information, so we send this person to the Telegram. So, and of course, once you have the mailing list, you can push all kinds of stuff. But we are not particularly pushy, I would say, at the beginning with many emails. We don't want to scare them at the beginning.
Just wait a little while.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think that's all of my questions. We haven't had any come in the chat, but is there anything I didn't ask about that you're like, if I was starting a membership program or I was back in year one of my membership program, I wish I had known this. I wish someone had told me this. Is there anything you might add there that folks could take away from today?
I have something. One of the things that we see often is calls to action. Like, you don't use them. You need to use them. It's important to have them on your page. It's important to have a donate button very prominently placed. It's important to have some sort of way to sign up for your newsletter on screen and not take people off the screen. To place these kinds of calls to action in your stories in a prominent place where people can see them, because people aren't going to get to the bottom of your story most of the time. No matter how poetic your prose is, most people aren't reading to the bottoms of stories. So getting those things up high, those are constant things that we see, especially with new clients coming to the hub. It's really the first thing that we talk about is, getting those calls to action on every page, on every article, on the homepage. In Oaklandside's case, their calls to action are very specific that allow them to change the message depending on where somebody is coming from. So it's really, tailored toward, if you're coming from Facebook, you're going to see this. If you're coming from Google, you're going to see this. You can be that specific. And I think it's important to be that specific, because you don't want to push out some sort of generic message that everybody gets to see. I think you want to try and be as personal as possible. So along with always be campaigning, I mean, this is part of it, is making sure that you have those calls to action very prominently placed on your site within your stories, so that that's doing part of the work for you.
And the one thing I'd add to that is test things. So on Oaklandside, we've got, I think, a great set of calls to action that we've gone through several iterations of, but it's our intention over time to see, does this language work better than that language? And the more you can test and compare and actually try and get the data to see what is effective and what's not, because our experience might be different to yours. We all have different audiences. We all have people that react differently. And, I think you need to always be trying something new and seeing if that generates a better response.
And Maria, anything to add to that?
I would say be transparent about everything, about what's going on, especially if things are not going well. It's a good just way to explain in detail, to be very open. I think that has definitely worked for us. And also if everything goes okay, that's fine too. But be really open. One of the things that we did that people love was that during the pandemic, we invite some readers online to come to our daily editorial meeting, just to be part of a meeting. They were silent, they couldn't really participate, but just to watch a regular editorial meeting talking about the topics of the day. And everybody loved that. So any kind of thing, especially in this remote world that made some things easier, it's a good opportunity to get people just watch and see what's going on in your newsroom.
Great. We got one last minute question from the group, if folks have any answer to it, from Ellen. She was wondering if any of you track email forwarding the way like Skimbassadors does, and if so, what are the mechanics of that? How do you know when people are forwarding your emails to others, and then try to get that person they forwarded to on the list, or bring them on as a member? Is that something any of you are working on? No. No.
Yeah. Can you even do that? I mean, is that like, I don't think in Europe you can do that, like track an email someone forwarded.
In the United States, you wouldn't necessarily know it exactly, but you can see if somebody has like 15 opens on an email, which I guess GDPR you would necessarily be able to know that. But sometimes you can see like this person opened it 15 times. As good as your email is, probably they're not reading your email 15 times a day. Chances are they forwarded it to a bunch of other people.
That we have. Yeah, that you have it in MailChimp, for instance. Yeah, they open. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But you don't have access to the email that they forwarded to.
Yeah, we've seen a couple of clients who get a lot of forwards. We have one who gets 20 to 40 forwards per email on this one particular email that they do. And so we started telling them to put language at the very top of their email that says, was this forwarded to you? Why not just get it on your own and have a way to sign up that way, which was not something they were doing previously. It was like, you have like 40 extra people reading this, you should probably take advantage of that. So, and that's totally rare. That's way higher than anything we've ever seen before. But definitely adding that language, like, was this email forwarded to you? Get it in your inbox on a consistent basis, and just kind of making sure that you're covering that base as well.
And one thing to be aware of is if you're using MailChimp, most people that forward emails just forward emails. They don't use the forward this email link. And if you just forward that email and somebody gets it, and then they unsubscribe, press the, like, I didn't want to get this, and unsubscribe, they are unsubscribing the person that forwarded it to them. We've had that, people tearing their hair out about that on regular occasions.
I think that there is, I'd have to look into the mechanics, but there is a way to sort of set up an extra step to that unsubscribe process. I actually recently forwarded an email from the city to a friend, and then she went to try and sign up herself or change the preferences, and she used the wrong one. And I got an email said, are you trying to update your preferences? If not, leave this alone, but tell the person, send them to the right sign up page. And so there are ways that you can sort of, I think, set up an extra step in that process to help avoid someone changing your preferences on you.
And if you want to do something like Skimbassadors, where you're encouraging people to forward the email and get them to sign up, we included some links in the resources last week, which we can send out again, on how to set up ambassador campaigns fairly easily, and the mechanics of that.
And that's with using a special referral tool. That's how they're able to track it, is they're not just using the simple forwarding email functionality. They're using a referral system. Great. Thank you, Maria, Lance, and Graham, for sharing all of that knowledge and digging deep into it. We're just going to go through a few final end of class wrap-up items then before we finish up. I wanted to give the panelists a little bit more time to answer the questions. So we're going to skip the staffing, a little bit on staffing your membership program that I thought we might go over. It'll be in the slides, and I'll link to some additional readings around that if you've got some staffing challenges you are facing. But let me share my screen. So as everybody knows, today is the last big group session. So we will not be doing any more big webinars, but we do still have some office hours ahead of us. So the first office hours will be next Thursday during class time, but only for an hour. So 1 p.m. Eastern on April 29th, we will have office hours, and we'll have another on May 13th, also at 1 p.m. And this is an opportunity to do more of what we did in the breakouts today, sort of really digging in and workshopping the things that your newsroom is tackling next. And the reason we put these after the class and have spaced these out is we know it takes a little bit of time to think through everything that's happening in the class. It takes a little bit of time to come up with plans within your organization. So we wanted to make sure that this group was available to you a little bit past the official end of the class so that you would be able to bring your questions there. So these office hours are going to be split into sort of 2 blocks. The first 30 minutes, we could do a group discussion around topics that we know are sort of top of mind for everybody because of the homework that we've done. And then the second 30 minutes will be an opportunity for a newsroom to ask for the opportunity to workshop their idea with the whole group. So say you have drafted your new onboarding series and you want to get feedback on it, you could sign up for one of those 15-minute slots, and we would give that time over for you to share a little bit about your work for 5 minutes or so, and then get group feedback for about 10 minutes on whatever it is that your newsroom is working on. So we'll invite people to sign up for those slots in the follow-up emails, and we'll send that out a couple of days before the office hours each time. And hopefully that will be an opportunity to get sort of more of that collective brain space on the ideas that you're working on, like we started to do in the breakouts today. The other thing is that we, in the beginning of the class, when we had that big Jamboard, one of the requests that we heard again and again is, can you please put all these materials in one place so we can keep track of them? And so Virginia and I have worked together to put all of the resources from this class into something called Coda, which we will share with you in the follow-up email tomorrow. And then we'll have everything that we shared in the class thus far. You'll find in there the slides, you'll find in there the recording, you'll find all the resources that we've shared in the post-call class. So you'll be able to get everything that we have shared in the past week in that one place after the class. And you'll continue to have access to that indefinitely, and we'll eventually be sharing that publicly. And the other thing is you'll find in Coda as well, the Membership 101 resources that we shared in the very first class. So if you're going back to things like audience research, you want to work on your value proposition, you want to sort of go back to the basics on designing your membership program, make sure you did everything you should have done when you launched a year ago, the Membership 101 resources are always there for you for that. And we're also happy to take questions around that in the office hours that are coming up. So yes, Jennifer, yes, we'll have calendar invites for the office hours. We are waiting to sort of see what came out of the group discussions in the class to decide how to design the office hours and what time to do them. We decided to move them to 1 p.m. in deference to our European colleagues. The 3 p.m. office hours were quite late in the evening for those of you on the other side of the Atlantic. So we figured we would move them to the 1 p.m. slot so that it's only interfering in dinner time and not your sleep time. So thank you for those of you who have been joining in the evening. We wanted to move the office hours to an earlier time to make sure that you all were able to join as well. Oh, all right. Well, thanks everybody for sticking with us through these weeks. Thanks for all the questions, doing the homework in between. We will also share out, it won't be on the Coda thing because that's going to be public, but we will share once again the list of participating newsrooms and email addresses. I figure many of you probably met newsrooms that are working through similar challenges. And so we'll share that contact information so that you can reach out to each other and keep that sort of one-on-one conversation going as well. And we hope to see you in office hours over the next 2 weeks. We'll send more information about signing up for that and what sort of topics we'll be tackling in the follow-up tomorrow.